You can write a law that bans greed. You can outlaw luxury. You can criminalize profit. You can demand purity. People think that's how you make a society better. But sometimes, that's how you make a society unworkable. Because vice, in the real world, is often just a motive with a name you don't like. Hunger, pride, comfort, status, curiosity, the need to get ahead. Civilizations don't survive by deleting those motives. They survive by channeling them, so they produce food, tools, trade, and repair instead of violence. And if you erase the channel, the motive doesn't vanish. It mutates. That is the shock at the center of a scandalous little book by Bernard Mandeville. Mandeville was a physician with the temperament of an auditor. He looked at polite moral speeches and asked a rude question. If everyone is so virtuous, why does prosperity keep getting built by people chasing what they want? So he wrote a fable. Not a children's story, a diagnosis in costume. A hive is prosperous, busy, loud with commerce, thick with work. And the hive is also full of fraud, vanity, and appetite. Everyone complains. Everyone grumbles. Everyone demands a cleaner life. They want the benefits of a thriving hive without the motives that make it move. Then the wish is granted. In the fable, honesty floods the hive like a chemical. The sharp deals vanish. The luxuries vanish. The unnecessary trades vanish. And then something uncomfortable happens. The hive doesn't become noble. It becomes smaller. Not because the bees became monsters, because the channels that converted selfish motives into coordinated work were ripped out. People think corruption is the only thing that disappears when you purify a system. But in Mandeville's hive, whole professions disappear with it, because the demand that paid them disappears. The economy doesn't collapse with an explosion. It collapses with silence. Work stops being pulled by reward. It stops being steered by signals. It stops being corrected by feedback. And the hive survives only by retreating, simpler, poorer, quieter, living inside a hollow shelter with less to coordinate and less to lose. That's the warning. Mandeville wasn't praising vice. He was pointing at a machine. Societies convert motives into outcomes through rules. So the dangerous question isn't, are people good? The dangerous question is, what happens when a government tries to make people good by decree? Because if you ban the motive's legal outlets, trade, property, profit, prices, you don't get clean virtue. You get a new economy built out of permission. And permission is never neutral. Permission is enforced. It's stamped, issued, withheld. It turns survival into a decision someone else can reverse. Now here's the line that matters, and why this fable belongs on this channel. The hive wasn't a fairy tale. It was a blueprint. A blueprint for what happens when someone tries to delete the dirty parts of human motivation without replacing the coordination system that made society function. And that blueprint has been built in real life. Not as metaphor, as policy, as paperwork, as a rule that turns ordinary exchange into evidence. So keep Mandeville's hive in your head, because we're about to watch a real country try to go honest by force. We're about to watch the wish get granted, and we're about to touch the first object that proves the fable is real, a banknote. You slide a banknote across a table, just to eat. She doesn't take it. She doesn't count it. She pushes it back with her fingertips. Not because it's worthless, because here, money is evidence. And evidence can get you killed. In a healthy hive, a signal routes the swarm. The workers move, the food arrives. Kill the signal, and you don't get purity. You get hunger, guessing, and guards. Now watch a civilization do the same thing to itself. In this place, cash isn't currency, permission is. The note has that papery, starchy smell that clings to your fingers. Outside, a bank door that used to swing all day is chained shut. This shouldn't be possible, yet it's how the system works. A society tried to make itself good by banning money and markets. It didn't get virtue. It got a machine. This is the balance sheet of civilizations. And by the end of this episode, you'll know what replaces prices when prices are outlawed, and why that replacement turns punitive. You live downstream of this whether you know it or not. Now let the hook cash out early. You don't reach for cash. You reach for a stamp, a cheap rubber stamp, dried ink at the edges, approved, denied. The kind of object that looks harmless until it replaces the market. Because once money is evidence, paper isn't paperwork. Paper is survival. So we touch the paper that made the rule real, a decree. It doesn't persuade, it instructs. Banks closed, currency abolished, buying and selling forbidden, private property confiscated, people reassigned, food issued. Read that and feel what it does to a normal day. No receipts, no price tags, no bargaining, no exit. About a quarter of the country died. That's why when trade becomes illegal, people stop optimizing and start hiding. Now we go mechanism first, and we keep the hive beside us the whole way. Mandeville told the story as a fable because fables let you say the humiliating thing out loud. The hive is full of motives respectable people pretend they don't have. Appetite, status, comfort, pride. Not because those motives are noble, but because the hive has channels. A way to turn wanting into work. A way to turn vanity into craft. A way to turn ambition into invention. Then the hive demands virtue. It demands honesty. It demands purity. And in the poem, a god grants the wish. The wish arrives like policy, and the hive collapses. That moment matters because it's the mirror of the decree you just touched. This decree is the wish, in ink. Make them honest, make them pure, remove the corrupt channel. People think that if you remove vice, society improves. But the fable's warning is colder. Remove the channel, and you don't remove the motive. You reroute it. The motive finds a new currency. And if the only currency left is permission, permission gets traded with fear. That's the machine. To understand it without ideology, we use a factor list. Information, incentives, enforcement. Say them once, then watch them change shape. Because a market is not a belief system. It's an information system, an incentive system, and an enforcement system that mostly doesn't need a fist. When you outlaw it, you still need all those functions. You just rebuild them out of paper and punishment. People think prices are about greed, but prices are also the hive's language. In a real hive, the signal points bodies toward resources. In a market, the signal points labor toward scarcity. The signal is not moral, it's directional. So the first substitution is information. In a market, prices compress reality into a number. Not a fair number, not a kind number, a responsive number. A price can be wrong, and the system corrects it through loss, refusal, and rerouting. But a decree can't correct itself through loss. A decree can only demand compliance. So the state has to invent a new signal that can travel through bureaucracy, and you can touch that signal. A posted target, a quota, a yield report, a tally sheet. Paper becomes the new language. And paper has a dangerous property. It looks like truth even when it isn't. Because the system is no longer asking, what happened? It's asking, did you comply? So information stops being measurement and starts being confession. If the harvest is low, that's not soil or planning. That's disloyalty. If the quota isn't met, that's not misallocation. That's sabotage. And once that rule enters the hive, the dance changes. In a healthy hive, a bad location just gets ignored. In a punishment hive, a bad report becomes a crime. So bad reports disappear, not from the fields, from the paperwork. People think lying is a moral failure, but in a punishment-driven reporting chain, lying is the stable strategy. A clerk learns it fast. A supervisor learns it faster. A local official learns it fastest. Because bad news is not neutral. Bad news is exposure. And once the system punishes exposure, the paper stops carrying reality. Planning becomes blind. The system is still shouting instructions, but it has lost the signal it needs to steer. Now you can feel why the stamp is not just a prop. The stamp is the new price. A price used to answer, "Can I have this?" Now a stamp answers, "Are you allowed?" And the moment permission replaces price, permission becomes tradable. Not officially, quietly, through favors, through silence, through fear. This is not a story about cartoon villains. It's a story about a design that converts ordinary friction into criminal evidence. People think bureaucracy is slow, but bureaucracy is fast when it's deciding who eats. Now we move to incentives. In a market, incentives are crude and sometimes ugly, but they are legible. Solve a real problem, and you can gain. Waste resources, and you can lose. Even if you hate the motives, the system still rewards responsiveness. In a purification by decree system, rewards don't come from solving problems. They come from satisfying paper. So incentives move from output to appearance, and the object that carries that shift is not money. It's the ration bowl. Touch the ladle. A ration ladle does not ask what you can pay. It asks whether you are approved. Food hits the bowl with a thick sound that feels final. Not because it's generous, because it's conditional. People think rationing is just another way to distribute. But rationing also makes food a tool of enforcement. If food is issued, it can be withheld. If food is issued, obedience becomes nutritional. In a market hive, effort chases nectar because nectar pays. In a paper hive, effort chases approval because approval feeds. So the incentive becomes visibility. Not productivity, visibility. Don't stand out. Don't create deviations. Don't trigger questions. Because questions create paperwork. Paperwork creates exposure. Exposure creates risk. And risk is the only price that still clears instantly. So a worker stops optimizing output and starts optimizing safety. This is where the fable stops being metaphor and becomes a diagnostic. Mandeville's hive didn't collapse because the bees became saints. It collapsed because the channel that converted motives into coordinated work got ripped out. Comfort stopped being paid through craft. Status stopped being paid through trade. Desire stopped being paid through invention. So desire rerouted into shortcuts, into favors, into hidden exchange, into whatever the guards couldn't see. People think black markets are vice, but black markets are often the economy trying to breathe through a closed airway. When the official channel criminalizes adaptation, adaptation goes underground. A whispered swap, a hidden stash, a quiet barter of skill for soup, a favor that gets you a stamp. These aren't exotic motives. They're survival responses in a system that turned normal exchange into evidence. And because the regime framed the project as moral purification, it interprets those survival responses as corruption. So the machine tightens. The more survival requires bending rules, the more bending rules becomes evidence of guilt. Now we move to enforcement. In a market, most exchange is voluntary. That doesn't mean it's fair. It means the system doesn't need a guard for every trade. Choice, refusal, and exit do a lot of enforcement for free. When trade becomes illegal, choice becomes suspicious. Exit becomes treason. Refusal becomes a crime. So enforcement has to grow until it replaces the missing channel. And this is where paper stops being administrative and becomes judicial. Because once the system loses the signal, it needs certainty. And if reality won't give it certainty, it manufactures certainty through classification. Who belongs? Who is trusted? Who is assignable? Who is punishable? That sorting is not done with prices. It's done with files. Touch the confession form. Paper, boxes, lines, name, background, associates, acts of sabotage. It looks ordinary. That's what makes it lethal. People think terror is chaotic, but administrative terror can be procedural. Because once exchange is gone, classification becomes the coordination tool. A shortage becomes sabotage. A failed plan becomes betrayal. A missing sack becomes a plot. And that does something precise for the system. It turns failure into enemy action. The machine never has to be wrong. The machine only has to be under attack. And once the system can always claim it is under attack, it can demand confession as proof of loyalty. Now feel the full object chain as a single mechanism, not a list. A banknote becomes evidence. A decree deletes the channel. A stamp replaces choice. A ladle turns obedience into nutrition. A confession form turns failure into treason. That is the substitution engine. Information collapses into paperwork. Incentives collapse into safety. Enforcement expands to hold the whole thing together. And once enforcement becomes the main productive activity, the economy doesn't just shrink, it mutates. Now the hive becomes something else. Not a place where signals route workers, a place where fear routes silence. Here's the catch. A command system can function at small scale in narrow domains when information is honest and feedback is safe. But a purification system that criminalizes ordinary incentives breaks the honesty it needs. So it compensates. It compensates with paper. And when paper fails, it compensates with coercion. And coercion destroys the information paper was supposed to carry. That feedback loop is the villain. Not a secret cabal, not a single bad actor. A design that punishes truth until truth disappears. Now we place one credibility guardrail where it belongs. This is an extreme revolutionary case. It is not a claim about every state program, every safety net, or every regulation. The mechanism under study is purification by decree, abolishing money and markets and private exchange, and replacing voluntary coordination with administrative allocation. That is a specific design choice, and it has a specific consequence. It turns the economy into a permission system. Now, you asked for other historical echoes where vice removal mutates into a substitute machine. We keep them tight, object-led, and mechanism first. Revolutionary France treated hoarding and profiteering as moral crimes. So the state posted maximum prices. A placard on a wall becomes a price tag backed by penalty. People think a maximum price forces fairness. But if the posted number is below reality, goods do not become cheaper, they disappear. And what replaces them is not virtue. It is inspection, denunciation, seizure, and shadow trade. a different permission economy, a different stamp, a different kind of fear. In another revolutionary command system, private trade was framed as speculation, so grain was requisitioned. A requisition order is just paper until it meets a barn. And once barns get raided by policy, farmers learn the only safe harvest is the harvest you don't report. People think requisition is temporary necessity, but while it lasts, it teaches the same behavior. Hide output, understate supply, distrust the collector, trade in shadows. Different banners, same substitution. Whenever a society tries to ban a motive it hates without replacing the channel that safely converts that motive into work, you get the same rerouting. Rations replace prices. Permits replace choice. Informal exchange replaces the official channel. Enforcement expands to chase the missing signal. Now bring Mandeville back, because he gives you the cleanest language for the civilizational lesson. The fable isn't telling you to admire vice. It's telling you that prosperity is often built by converting imperfect motives into coordinated labor through rules. You can dislike the motive and still depend on the conversion. But if you delete the conversion channel in the name of moral purification, the motive doesn't vanish. It mutates. And it often mutates into the worst currency of all, fear. This is where Adam Smith tightens the lesson. Smith disliked the cynical move of calling virtue and vice the same thing. He treated that framing as licentious, but he kept the engineering insight. Self-interest is a force. Institutions either channel it into productivity or drive it underground into secrecy. So the question is never vice versus virtue. The question is what the rules reward and what the rules punish. Now we state the paradox once. People think that if everyone becomes good, less greedy, less materialistic, society should improve. But in the extreme, purification can make society collapse. And we resolve it once. Because vice, in Mandeville's sense, is often just self-interest and desire redirected through rules. Remove the legal channels, prices, trade, property, profit, and coordination doesn't become moral, it becomes administrative. Administration scales only with coercion, and coercion destroys trust, information, and output. Now close the loop back to the opening scene. The most frightening part is not that money was banned. The frightening part is what filled the vacuum. A price used to settle disagreement quietly. Now the stamp settles it. A wage used to pull effort toward a task. Now approval pulls effort toward silence. A market used to reveal scarcity through painful but legible signals. Now scarcity hides inside reports that must never look bad. And once a society teaches its people that telling the truth is dangerous, the society does not get purer, it gets blind. People think purity cleans a system, but purity that deletes channels doesn't clean. It suffocates. And when a system suffocates, it builds guards. Now the viewer lens, something you can carry without panic. When you hear someone promise virtue by removing the dirty parts of human motivation, don't argue about their morality. Ask what replaces the channel. If prices are replaced by stamps, if incentives are replaced by fear, if bad news is punished, you are watching a permission economy assemble, even if the slogans sound holy. Now we land the verdict in the voice of this channel. Permissions become the currency. When you delete prices, you don't delete scarcity, you delete the signal. Protect yourself by understanding incentives, especially when someone promises virtue by decree. Subscribe to the balance sheet of civilizations.